Good evening, everyone. Wow, I'm really mic'd, huh?
Yeah.
I hear it.
Totally black out there.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It is my wild honor and completely unbelievable to me that I'm here with Griffin Dunne for personal reasons that I'll explain in a little bit. But I'm really excited to talk about this book and introduce it to new readers. And I think the way that we should start that is with Griffin reading a little bit.
Honored to be here, and your foreword for this book is magnificent.
Thank you.
So, Vegas, which takes place in 1970, the subtitle is a Memoir of a Dark Season. John was going through a period, I don't know if it's writer's block, but trying to find material. He was the kind of reporter that just would overhear conversations and keep it down. And write it down. He was a bit of a voyeur, and he goes to Vegas for 3 lost months and hangs out with a private detective named Bruno Mano, a stand-up comic named Jackie Casey, and a prostitute named Artha. So this is when he meets Artha. I had met Artha because of my chronic insomnia. When I couldn't sleep and the late show was over, I would leave my apartment and wander through the casinos on the Strip. There was something restful about a casino at 5 a.m. The tourists have gone to bed, most of the tables have closed down, and the slots are almost stilled. It's the time of the serious gamblers. There is no music from the showrooms, the hookers have mostly made their connections, and there is only the soft rustle of money at the baccarat table and the serious, hard-faced men for whom gambling seems an evangelical experience. She was sitting in the Keno lounge at the Flamingo. I remember that my immediate impression was of a corrupted nun. She was wearing black pantsuit with a white Peter Pan collar and an elaborate wig of sausage curls. She looked like one of those parochial girls I used to try to pick up when I was in my teens, Polish girls who took a business course in high school and worked in the factories of East Hartford and who were said to fuck. Night after night on my summer vacations, I would cruise the bars of Déclassé East Hartford, an upper middle class adolescent with a high-density acne and fake draft card, sheltered by a carload of like-minded friends from the tonier suburbs to the west, all of us closeted virgins convinced that the blue-collar paroles loved it, that we were different, they were hotter, they had silver tongues, these Polish girls, these Italian numbers, put an American flag over her face and fucked for old glory. We cruised and we blustered, and night after night we drank rye and ginger ale and vomited in the back of the car and went home empty-handed, complaining hoarsely of lover's nuts, an affliction I still am not sure exists, but which was an article of my post-pubescence. That is why I was so struck by Artha the first time I saw her in the Keno lounge of the Flamingo. She was the memory of every ethnic I had never, as we used to say, got into. I could not take my eyes off her. I thought at first she was playing Keno, sitting there all alone at 5 in the morning, chewing on a black Keno crayon, then bending over and writing feverishly on a Keno ticket. She must have seen me staring at her, but gave no indication. Then she was paged by the hotel operator. "Miss Artha Ging, please call for Miss Artha Ging." She got up, fluffed her sausage curls, and crumbled the Keno ticket into the ashtray. I watched her go to the house telephone, talk briefly into it, then head for the baccarat table. The velvet rope was lifted, and she took her place by one of those serious, hard-faced men with a neat pile of $100 bills in front of him. He gathered his winnings, stuffed a $100 bill into the tuxedo pocket of the dealer, Then, taking Artha by the arm, walked across the casino to the elevator. I thought, well, someone was getting into an East Hartford girl, finally. I went back to the Keno lounge and sat in the seat she had left. Desultory, I crumpled the Keno ticket she had thrown into the ashtray. On the back of the ticket, in the same neat Palmer penmanship hand that I had been taught by the Sisters of Mercy at Verdum Dye School in Hartford, was a verse. Sometimes I find my life a maze of lonely nights and aspirin days, longing for the golden cup, terrified of waking up. Easy 8s and 21, a life that's over before it's begun. A poetry writing hooker.
I just remembered a fun fact from John's Paris Review interview, which is that Joan wrote the poems.
Oh, really?
That's what he said.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
that's pretty
he said
good.
that Joan was like, I can write you bad poetry if you need bad poetry. And I hadn't thought about that passage since I reread that. You guys, this is so exciting. I feel like John Gregory Dunne is understandably known as the husband of Joan Didion. This was definitely the case for me. And I have been reading Joan Didion since I was a child. That's like how they baptize you if you're a child in Los Angeles and you want to be a writer. They're like, here you go, here's your slouching towards Bethlehem. But then I also came to him through his brother, Dominic Dunne, Griffin's father, who was covering a murder trial in Los Angeles, the Menendez trial, and my aunt was the prosecutor. And she had the misguided idea that I should attend the trial, which I did, and it left quite an impression. I did.
And you were 10.
4 times, yeah. I had to go in, the bailiff would take me into the hallway when it got graphic. But
That it did.
I desperately wanted to be a writer, and she took me to the chateau, and she introduced me to her friend, Dominic, and I thought he was the most sophisticated person I had ever seen in my life, and he was so, so, so kind to me. And that began, you know, a lifetime of reading everything he ever wrote, from the Two Mrs. Grenvilles to every single Vanity Fair article. But then, like 3 years ago, I was like, so I know a lot about this family, like arguably too much. I've spent too much time reading this work, but I know nothing about John Gregory Dunne, like 0. And I decided to start with Vegas because Joan is right kind of off the page. But I'm as excited as you guys to hear from Griffin tonight about his uncle and to talk about his work. So I want to start by asking, what was your relationship with him like as a nephew? I'm going to get to the writer part second.
Yeah. For some reason, we got along from, he always like got me. And, you know, I guess I was about 8 or 9, and not even that, my mother had found a house for them in Palos Verdes, and so they moved from New York. And so I didn't see him much until, it was like meeting him for the first time when he moved to Los Angeles. And the movie, It's a Mad World had come out. And it was with Spencer Tracy and it was the funniest movie I ever saw in my life. And I go to John and John's new house in Palos Verdes, and Jimmy Durante keeps saying, it's under the big W, under the big W. And it's where all the money that all these crazy people are driving all over the country looking for. And there, in their backyard, was the palm tree shaped like the W. And I go, it's under the big W, it's under the big W. And he goes, what the fuck are you talking about? What are you going? That's the movie, It's a Mad World. it was shot here. He goes, oh, I never saw it. You're crazy. It's the funniest movie ever. And then we started arguing about Bond movies, and off we went. And both of them included me in their social lives, which was very active, and would have me to their parties, and that they would have for. They gave a party for Tom Wolfe when Kool-Aid Acid Test had come out, and I was like 12 years old, and they said, oh, bring Griffin, and Janis Joplin, I know he loves Janis Joplin, she's going to be there.
Oh, is this is this Franklin Avenue?
Yes, it was.
She writes about it in the White Album, right?
Yes.
Okay, keep going.
And I ended up making a short movie about it,
You're 12.
I never got to meet Janis.
Oh.
But I did. That's just an example, and it stayed that way, all the way through John's life. We had dinner regularly, and John would have roll calls in the morning, and he'd call Calvin Trillin and David Halberstam, and somewhere I was on the phone tree, and we'd gossip and talk about what movie got panned and who wrote what, and laugh. We were very close.
Do you feel Griffin's written one of my favorite growing up in Hollywood? No, my actual favorite growing up in Hollywood memoirs. And maybe I'm projecting a little bit, but like, were John and Joan ever kind of surrogate parents to you in a way, maybe emotionally? I know your parents were both active in your life, but...
Yeah. No, they were most certainly the cool aunt and uncle.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't look at your parents and think they're the coolest people on earth. I was always aware how cool they were.
Yeah, it sounds like they had that.
And John and... his reporting, and they had that column in the Saturday Evening Post that they would alternate. And John had been to Vietnam, reporting of it with David Halberstam, and he cruised courthouses and knew cops and homicide detectives and DAs and public defenders. Described them with their cheap suits and the egg yolk on their tie, and. I just found him fascinating. And of course, Joan was, I just felt like the very first famous person I was ever related to,
The first. Yeah, that sums up your family.
I couldn't understand her books, but I knew she was famous.
So when they moved to California, did they already have that level of fame? I mean, it sounds like it from that party in Palos Verdes.
No, that happened late. They were well known and respected in the world of magazines. And Joan had a book that had just come out when my parents met Joan for the first time, Run River, her first book. But not everything was heading slouching towards Bethlehem that really broke out hugely. But they were working journalists, having to crank out a deadline, and they would each find their own different stories of what to cover.
But were they, in those days, in conversation with each other? I know they became...
They were drawn to very different subjects, but they would edit each other.
Even that early, they would edit each other?
Oh, yeah, from very early on. They were each other's first editors. And so, when Joan wrote, the famous piece that was... when they were in Hawaii at the Royal...
in the islands.
Yeah, in the islands. And she said that she was, considering divorcing her husband, which came as a huge shock to us. John edited it.
Right. And I was having the same thought while I was reading Vegas, because, Joan is hovering via phone calls, and she feels like something that he's in conflict with, but not directly. And I mean, it's definitely a slightly antagonistic relationship in this book between him and the wife that's back in LA. But I'm like, she read this. I mean, do you know anything about her reaction to this book?
She would have gone, you found your material.
Yeah.
And she would have been his first reader, and she would have known how she was portrayed, and she knew how depressed he was, trying to find out what his next book was and what to write about. And so when he calls her, in the middle of the night, and tells her that the stand-up comic he's been hanging out for 3 months, this mid-level, hilarious person, except
Filthy
on
mouth.
stage
Filthy mouth.
as a comic, but an incredible character. And he says to his wife, Jackie Casey sets me up with a teenage hooker who likes to suck and fuck. And she goes, unshockable. She says, oh, well, that'll be good material. He goes, well, I'm not going to fuck her. He goes, well, that could be part of the story, too.
Yeah.
So they spoke to each other as writers, like they understood each other's struggles and challenges, and they were both wildly observant and noticed things that most people don't.
That reminds me of a moment in your documentary, actually, that I haven't thought about in forever, which is when you ask her, when she saw the child on acid, what was your thought? And she looks at you like it's so obvious, and she says, it was gold. Like, she is a writer.
Yeah, that was
first and foremost.
And her daughter was the same age as the kid on acid in Los Angeles with John. But she really thought about it, and we're all waiting for her to go, it was the most horrible thing I ever saw as a mother. Oh my God. It was gold. And my next thought was, now that was gold.
Yeah. Yeah, you captured it. And I do feel like Joan might be in on the joke of Vegas a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
We were talking about one of their first dates. You want to tell us?
Yeah. This is the meet cute Hollywood story of all time. John had an apartment on the East Side, and across the street, sort of one flight down, but eye level, was a woman, fairly attractive woman, who was very promiscuous. And she left her blinds open. And he would keep like a record of what she was doing. And sometimes the guy might be over, he might be a little rough with her, and then he'd go, oh my God, should I just run over? And then he'd play it out. But this became a character that he, fantasized a whole story about her, where she was from. He knew nothing about her. And the first time that early in their relationship, he brought her to his apartment. They sat at the window and watched her for hours and didn't say a word to each other. They just, till they were so exhausted, they went to bed for the first time.
So
that's
romantic.
A cute first date.
Wow. So I do feel like when she read this, she probably appreciated the voyeuristic quality that
absolutely.
It had.
Yeah,
Like,
and I think they both had that in common.
yeah, absolutely. It's what you were saying about them being incredible noticers. I also think what is so fascinating now that I've read a fair amount of John Dunne is that he is such an insider. He's like appears in everyone's biographies. They had this like legendary social life. But when he's writing, he's always an outsider. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you think that he ever felt like an insider, or if he like always had that like, I'm a boy from Hartford, Connecticut, like.
I think he always, and my father had the same thing, a bit of a chip on their shoulder.
Right.
And I think John, no matter, when they became very successful screenwriters in Hollywood, they would entertain the greatest filmmakers of the 70s, and Scorsese and Warren Beatty and Schrader and the incredible list of people who that he would be friends with, but he was also always observing. Mm-hmm. He was also always, keeping track of dialogue and mannerisms, and and if he heard something that was funny, you better be prepared to know he's going to tell somebody else, because he really delighted in that. But he was from Hartford, West Hartford. Being Catholic in his day, there was tremendous prejudice against the Irish. No matter, even if he was affluent, he was called lace curtain Irish. but his grandfather, came over on the famine, during the famine, Great Famine from Ireland, illiterate, taught himself how to read, swept out in a grocery store, ended up buying the grocery store and then the bank next door, and became a man that a school was named after him. He was very prominent. This is where the original money came from. Despite all that, John really clung to, being on the outside of that, still feeling kind of like the Catholic immigrant in a Protestant world. And I think that was an engine that served him well as a writer.
He does seem like he always has something to prove a little bit. There's a lot of energy there, and I don't know that it's vindictive, because I don't think that it's mean, but it is that chip on your shoulder, ambitious quality. Yeah,
and fearless too. I mean, even if someone was, of power and a studio head, and could be paying him a lot of money for a screenplay, if he didn't like a note, if he didn't, notes that he was given in the screen for a story meeting, he would just come at the person and just he'd be funny, but the person would be embarrassed for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, you can tell from writing.
Yeah, but also where he was, I'd say, the fiercest, and the man you did not want to fuck with is anyone who wrote about Joan negatively. And Pauline Kael once wrote a negative review of Play It As It Lays, and then sort of rounded back that she never even really liked the book. And I forget the content of it, but John would then publish in the New York Review of Books a review of all of Pauline Kael's books and reviews, and just tear it to pieces.
Oh, so he held a grudge.
He held a grudge. You're going to talk about my wife, I'm going to talk about you. And they had, there was a great deal of animus between less so with Joan, but John toward Pauline. They straightened it out years later, but that's the kind of guy he was.
Yeah, I love that. I think, we miss our literary feuds. We get our rap feuds, but not literary anymore.
Yeah.
I also grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school, and I'm wondering if you see the Catholicism kind of as a overriding lens on his work, and like what that looks like, because I know it's a part of your work too.
Yeah. No, I think it was an enormous influence. His aunt, my great aunt, had been a nun. And then a spinster, and then left the convent under mysterious circumstances. We never figured out why, but came back and sort of helped raise the boys and John and my dad's sisters, and they would go to church religiously. My grandmother was incredibly religious, and so they would go to church, but also confession. And it's where a lot of their humor comes from, of what they're going to tell the priest. And it always was, they were all obsessed with, masturbation. The priest all wanted to know this. And basically everything was like, and sex being awful, and going to hell for it. And of course, if you're told you're going to go to hell for having sex, you just want to have more of it. It's like, it's just too tempting. So they all thought about that, and it's all sort of under a cloud of shame.
Right.
And it's when things are like dirty and that you can't do it. And, he writes about, when he's with all the boys, they're all like, they just think about sex all the time. And
do men really talk like that in the steam room? Do men really talk like that when they're in the steam room together? That was nasty. That whole
nasty shit. Yeah. And he only has to hear it once, and he writes it down, and that's what took place.
So I think there's also the legendary Catholic guilt. And I do think
Yeah.
that is connected to the shame.
Yes, exactly.
There's something about Dunne as the narrator in Vegas where he is really struggling with his like virility or masculinity in some way. There seems, and he's very ashamed that he's not like the other men. I find that to be really Catholic as well.
Yeah, oh, completely.
And the
Completely.
obsession with prostitutes.
Yeah, yeah, it is like that. And again, he goes to his outsider. You know, when he goes to Vegas, you know, all these men are just screwing hookers and, you know, be actresses and talking about it like all the time. And, you know, that's not how John talks, but it's how he can recount it. But I think it was when he writes in the book, he writes it from the reflection of I don't know. It is guilt, you know, or there's some kind of element of shame and guilt that, you know, he puts on himself. That's what I also like. He's so self-deprecating.
Oh my God, he's so self-deprecating. I think
the funniest person is the way he describes himself.
absolutely, and that's what saves the book. To be honest, like
yes.
otherwise it would just be character studies, but it becomes a portrait of this very unreliable narrator, and he can make fun of himself like no one else.
Absolutely.
So we talked a little bit about what John meant to you as an uncle, but we were talking back in the green room about your realization recently about how he's influenced your writing. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was so thrilled McNally Jackson is going to reissue this book. You know, it was a it was a book. I grew up dyslexic. I always struggled with reading. This book, you know, when it came out, I got a copy for Christmas inscribed, and I just plowed through it. I just understood almost what the next sentence was going to be, and I hadn't read it again until I did the audiobook, and I really wanted to be part of this. I'm so glad to see John getting recognition. I think people are going to flip out over this. So I volunteered to do the audiobook, and I'm in the booth, and I keep bursting out in laughter while I'm doing it, and they have to do it over again. But it occurred to me, particularly when I was writing my years as a teenager, who was a, you know, pretty horny kid, and the things that I observed about women and the things I talked about, and, you know, losing virginity and masturbation, I went, I'm channeling John. I mean, he was a huge influence on me. And the way he talked, the things that he noticed. But I didn't realize that until I was in that booth and reading it again after many years. That somehow his self-deprecation, the outrageous situations that he was in, and
There's a playfulness.
and
There's
a playfulness, yeah.
to the prose. I think that you guys both have.
So I found myself sort of channeling him without really realizing it, and I was, I don't know, it made me feel good.
Yeah, it's a joyful thing. I actually, since we started talking about this, was remembering that the loss of virginity as like a crucible is a big part of Vegas as well.
Yes, it is. Yes.
And John calls up the prostitute that he lost his virginity to because he's in this kind of like morose state of mind, like where have the years gone, facing my mortality. And he's like, do you remember me? And it was really like 20 years ago. And she's like, who, what? And he was like, oh, it was just 5 years ago. I came and saw you. And she was like, honey, I'm 70. And it was this prostitute that all the boys in out in like the tri-state area would like come into New York and lose their virginity to this woman. And It's one of my, I tried to put it in the intro, actually. We didn't have space for it because it's just so epic and so funny.
And that's the other thing
But you
I
have one
found
too.
I had in common was a hooker obsession.
Yeah.
I love saying the word hooker from a very early age.
Well, people don't say it anymore.
Yeah, apparently not.
No.
Sex workers.
So there you go.
By the way, this movie, I was reading the book in the booth going, I'm going to get canceled. There's so many inappropriate things that the characters say that, but when I was growing up in LA, there was a coffee shop. Before I had a driver's license, I was like 14, 13. My friend Charlie and I we could walk to this coffee shop that was in a hotel, and we would just see the prostitutes. And their madame was the woman who seated us. And we'd just sit with these prostitutes and go, you boys are so cute, you're so cute. So yeah, that's where I got my hooker interest.
But do you want,
I didn't pay for it.
No, I got you. We're good. Do you want to tell the story of you losing your virginity from your book to round that out? We were just
you
talking.
mean I just told you?
Yeah, we were just talking about it.
Oh yeah, okay. So I changed the name.
Yeah, as one does.
And yeah, I was 13 and she was older, but I changed the name, and I was actually trying to find her so that I could use her name, but I couldn't, and I don't say anything bad about her. She's quite a funny, very literate. She was an aficionado of erotic literature, of Anais Nin. She could quote off the top of her head.
Incredible.
And so anyway, I write it, and the book comes out, and I get an email from her with her real name. And it's, I mean, God, so many decades later. And she goes, you got to, it was really, really good. I liked myself in it. You got a few things wrong. I don't think I was that much older than you. And I went, yeah, you were. But, and there it began like I'm writing back, oh, it's so good to hear from you, and I'm so glad you did not step in the book. And the letters got more and more intense. Yeah. Like, I'd like to come to New York. I think you were the only person I ever really loved. I'm a grandmother. My children are all grown up, and I'm very unhappy. And
oh my God. Well, I just think that it's an incredible parallel. Yeah, she loved the book, but it's an incredible parallel as John's calling this woman who doesn't remember him, and you're like, dude, that was 50 years ago. I want to talk a little bit about their marriage, because that was a big feature of the documentary, in a way.
Yeah.
And it is one of the core tensions of Vegas. It seems like, at points in the book, like there's a little bit of a power struggle between the two of them. Two writers, both geniuses, like both very famous. But as we were talking earlier, you were like, it wasn't quite like that. I'd like for you to tell.
Yeah, I think they were more competitive about subjects and working under deadline. And I think John really would push Joan to, the famous story of the woman who set her husband on fire. It was one of the essays in Slouching, and she's covering this. She didn't quite get the story, and John would go, get back out there, San Bernardino. And that's not the right angle. Go out there and get it right. And it helped push the essay to another level. So they would have that, but everyone of late, when John had been written about, or people who didn't know them, would make this assumption that he was twisting with envy because she was so famous and he wasn't. And when he was alive, John and Joan was one word, John and John. They were aligned as partnership, and they were, and people who knew writing and journalism knew how important he was. And, you know, his books were legend, and his sense of humor, and it was during the new journalism era.
Yeah.
So he was widely respected, but he also was aware that Joan was ultra famous as a writer. And, you know, when they would go to this restaurant, Elio's in the Upper East Side, where they went several, you know, once a week at least, if they were sitting at a table and there was someone over at another table craning their neck and he was blocking the view, so they were trying to see Joan, he would move his chair so they could get a clean line. So, you know, that was not one of the issues. They fought a lot. John had a horrifically scary temper at times. So they would have fights. You know, one of the, you know, Joan would write about, you know, John Wayne and how much she loved John Wayne, and which was not very popular. It was during the Vietnam War, and his movie was The Green Berets.
Well, she was a little conservative at that point, right?
Well, she was Republican.
Yeah.
And she voted for Goldwater. Now John counters that. You know, even though John was the protector, like an Irish John Wayne, if anybody crossed with his wife, he also hated John Wayne. And he has a hilarious thing in here of, you know, John would fantasize. There's great things of him lying in bed trying to sleep with terrible insomnia. And he has this fantasy that he's on a talk show with John Wayne.
Oh, yeah.
And how he tells, and he just calls out John Wayne on like the Dick Cavett show, and that, you know, you're just a fake cowboy, and, you know, you never fought in the war, and you dodged the World War II, and, you know, and it's really, really funny. But I always thought that was like, if there was a literary dig, that was his idea of a dig.
Yeah, absolutely. You know? Or he's fighting John Wayne for Joan in that moment. I love that. And I find that between this book and In the Islands and these references to their early marital discord, it seems like it was in the first part of their marriage, I find it very comforting and reassuring because they had this incredibly prolific and it seems like very intimate partnership.
Yeah.
Were you aware, how old were you when this was all happening?
1970 this is, right?
Yeah.
I was like 13.
And were you aware that John and Joan were having...
No.
Did you know that he moved to Las Vegas?
I kind of heard that. The story I heard was not about Vegas. I knew that when he got back. But the story I heard was how he left in the morning to say, oh, you know, we're out of bread. I'm going to go to the Safeway, you know, right around the corner that you were living on Franklin in L.A. And he calls 12, 13 hours later from San Bernardino. He drove like into 2 states. And Joan said, well, did you get the bread? He goes, yeah, I got the bread. But he ends up staying in a motel. You know, he would just get in the car and just drive. He thinks he's going to the nearest Safeway, but decides to go to the one out in Fresno, you know.
What do you think kept them together?
I think they were, you know, just a couple of penguins. You know, they weren't, they were just so devoted to each other.
Yeah.
You know, they just had each other's backs. You know, Joan was very, you know, reliant on John. And he took care of stuff, you know, and the practicalities. And, you know, if they're having a deal, they love to talk Hollywood deals and screenplays and talk about rolling points and soft points and percentages and grosses. But John would be the one to negotiate the deals, and he'd be the tough guy. But Joan would be the one who would, you know, fuel him on, you know, and they, you know, and they were parents, and they had this, you know, lovely child that they adopted from a, you know, it was an infant. and they were, you know, that was the light of their lives. And you know, she was just a great kid, and they loved to show her off. And so they also had that, and you know, but they would, and they entertained a lot. But they would, you know, definitely have some fights. But we never thought, outside of that article, which we were shocked by, when she says, "I'm in the islands," in lieu of a divorce. That was the first we heard of it.
And then when you read this book, you must, I mean, you were a teenager.
I'm a teenager, and I'm going, I can't believe he's telling Joan he's going to fuck a hooker.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, the whole book was probably inappropriate, except you grew up.
Not be more.
You
That's
grew
why I
up
read
very
it so
fast.
easily.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I got a real window into, you know, what that was about, but also I just loved the way he just kept a collection of things of what people did, of the note taking and the three main characters. I found hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fidelity to speech is one of the hallmarks of this book.
Yeah,
and
the dialogue is incredible.
His ear for dialogue is cuckoo banana. Like, it's just beyond. So I like to think, and I'm wondering if you think this is correct, that this book is in a way a rebuttal to In the Islands. That Joan got to write like her almost divorce piece, but that it might have been a private joke between them. I mean, that's why I was asking about their marriage.
Yeah, well, I think that one thing that they were in total alignment with is, no matter how personal, if it's a story, if it's something that you know, works in print, do it. You know, Joan wrote, "A writer is always selling somebody out." So if John sold her out, she go, fair play. You know, that's how it worked. So I think they had a remarkable ability to be detached from. They would look at it. It's like Joan saying, looking at a child while she is a child the same age and recognizing that's gold.
Right.
They would feel the same way about each other's material, even if it was personal to them, about them, or, you know, themselves, about the other.
I do, and just from my own personal reading, I think that probably one of the things has to be one of the things that kept them together for so long is this mutual respect, but also this kind of egging each other on towards better writing, towards the story, towards the truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We do have questions here, but I did want to ask you, besides Vegas, because everyone's going to read this book and be obsessed with it, where would you direct a John Dunne reader after Vegas?
Oh, what would I recommend to read
yeah.
after The Studio?
Oh, yeah.
The Studio remains the best book about Hollywood that I still have ever read. It's set. John, before he became, you know, a screenwriter, managed to talk the head of 20th Century Fox into letting him sit in all the story conferences, the pre-production, go to the sets. Big mistake. And he wrote this about the, you know, how the sausage is made in a Hollywood dream factory at a time when just before Easy Rider is about to come out, or Easy Rider I think has come out, but it's a year in which The Graduate was on one side, and they were making Dr. Dolittle, which almost bankrupted the company, and you had these two sensibilities, and the seniors, the older executives at 20th Century Fox had lost the thread of who their audience was, and it was, you know, Mike Nichols and Dennis Hopper and Warren Beatty and all the people that would follow, and he captures that period in Hollywood history, but it's also so funny, and so it's kind of sad because there's really not a studio system so much anymore.
Yeah.
But there's still that that fear and that desperation of, people trying to come up with a story idea or close a deal or, go in and pitch a story. That kind of fear and desperation is never going to go away in Hollywood.
Yeah, right. Those are the gears that keep everything going. I'll add to the studio that I love Monster, which is kind of a companion to the studio in a way, but instead of detailing the inner workings of a movie studio, he covers the decade plus that he and Joan spent working on Up Close and Personal.
Up Close and Personal.
Which had a different title. It starts with the source material and it takes them, it is over a decade. They're fired 3 times. And I do screenwriting as my day job. And I'm like, I should have read this before I got into this business because first of all, he's so good at writing about money.
He loves it.
He's really dissecting their contracts and just amortizing the payments over the span of days. And I'm like, whoa, man.
They're still the only screenwriters to have royalties to a Barbra Streisand album for A Star Is Born.
Right.
That's never going to happen again. But they did very well. I forgot to mention too, that, decades later, I became, after reading the book, I became a film producer with my partner, Amy Robinson, and we developed Vegas into a movie at 20th Century Fox.
That's fun. I can't believe you didn't tell me that.
It's so funny that we've talked about revisiting.
Did you have a script?
Oh, yeah. Oh, great script. And then they read it and went, no fucking way.
Correct.
And even harder now, but Amy and I talk about reviving it.
I know. It would be wild.
It's just so wild. I mean, it's a Vegas that doesn't exist, I mean, now it's a theme park, and,
Yeah.
it's bring the kids. But it was a dirty, desperate place that was perfectly suited for his frame of mind.
Yeah, he could have gone anywhere. He could have gone to Colorado or Hawaii, and he goes to Las Vegas. I use the word grotesque in my foreword, and I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah.
It's like a carnival. First question from you guys, thank you. How did reading your uncle impact your thinking and feelings about him? As you were reading him, did you feel like you got to know him more? Or?
Reading this, when I read it first, yeah, as I said, he was my uncle, but I really idolized him. I mean, I really thought he was one of the coolest people I ever met, as well as Joan. So this just reinforced it.
Yeah.
And, I guess I was sort of in the back of my mind thinking I'd like to be a writer, and I remember consciously going, wow, John really, keeps track of dialogue and lists and, makes things to do. And I remember thinking, God, it'd be really cool. I think I even tried to do that with a yellow pad of if I heard something, I had one of those little notebooks and a pen that I was really emulating, oh, that's what writers do. I didn't stick with it very long, but I love the idea. He made the idea of being a writer, particularly at this time period. It was Hunter Thompson and Tom Wolfe, just who were, writing. They were reporters, but they would put themselves, Norman Mailer, but they put themselves in the story,
Right.
and write from a first person. And it was a very exciting time. And John was right in the mix of it.
Yeah, it's like writers are always in the ivory tower normally, or you imagine them in a tiny cottage somewhere. But this generation of reporters, they were living in a shitty hotel in Vegas.
That's right.
Yeah, it must have seemed very sexy. I also can't imagine wanting to be a writer and coming from your family. It must have been so daunting.
Yeah, I think that held me off. I had to wait till the last one died.
How did John Dunne think about Vegas in his later years? Any sense of John, or, and I had a question adjacent to this, what was his reaction when the book came out? Did he feel it was understood?
That I'm not sure that I ever knew or remembered. I think he's always been very proud of everything he's done. He did not lack confidence for his writing. I think it was I think it was quite well reviewed.
It was.
And when you wrote books in those days, whether you were from LA or New York, the publishers really used to promote it. They'd send you out on the road, and and they do that for every book. They had more money then, and so he would go out there and he'd be on all the talk shows. Also, they had nighttime talk shows and the morning talk shows. They had writers.
I can't imagine.
Yep. And so he would he'd be on Dick Cavett or and then in the morning on Good Morning America or the Today Show or something.
And so you think that towards the end of his days, he was proud of his career and his
without
collection?
a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. There were so many, and he started, his first book was Delano, that was about the traveling through the Central Valley of California with Cesar Chavez.
Right.
And the first time I ever saw John lose his shit was when my mom thoughtlessly put a bowl of grapes from Safeway on the table. He went nuts. So he was like in the story. And it was, his first book, and it was, a serious reportage, and probably, had a very limited audience for that. So, he wanted to have a wide readership.
There is something kind of really like moral about a lot of the work. Like he does have like a sense of right and wrong, and you feel like he would enforce it.
Yeah, very much.
We maybe don't know the answer to this, but do you think that writing Vegas changed him? Do you think that, he never really wrote a book like this again.
Yeah, he didn't. I can't address how much it changed. He always, stayed the sort of same person. But in his novels, in True Confession, which is all Catholic, a Catholic priest and a LA homicide cop who were brothers. It had the rough and tough Irish cop, priest, confessional Catholic church of guilt and shame overlaying throughout that whole book. I don't think that sensibility ever left him. It's sort of reflected in so much of his fiction. And then when he wrote Harp, which is very autobiographical, they're essays about himself, and being an Irish Catholic. That's him doing like a deep dive, into his past as much as he could find out from being from Ireland.
I love Harp, and I think as we're wrapping up, I'm wondering if you would talk about him and your father. That's a big part of your book, and
Yeah.
I find it very moving. And so what we've already covered in this talk is that your mother and father helped them move to California, so they were obviously close at that point in time.
They were very close. And my parents were also very social, but for a different generation of filmmaker, and it was the mid-'60s. And, the filmmakers like Billy Wilder and William Wellman and, actors Vincent Price and David Niven, were of an elegant of a certain time that was more, in vogue of the 40s and earlier. And so they were sort of a little bit of a dinosaur generation, a little possible extinction down the road. And when John and John came into screenwriting, there was a rebirth of cinema with younger filmmakers and younger actors. And my father had fallen out of vogue. Nice way of saying he went totally broke and could not get a job and was totally unhireable, very low point. And they were very, very close. And the three of them produced Panic in Needle Park, which John and John wrote, and then they had a great time. And then they did Play It As It Lays, where they had less of a good time. And the movie did not do well. And my father's career truly went into the toilet. And, he had to get sober and tried to get he did. And, as he went down, John and John became a very kind of famous social, creative, famous writers, on both for movies and as reporters and novelists. And that's where the resentment, if you ever want to fall out with someone, lend them money. And my father could never get over the shame of that he had to be helped out by his little brother. And that was the beginning, and it carried through for many, many years. You mentioned the Menendez, which my father covered, every day in the courtroom. And now he was a crime reporter, quite famous, which was in John's territory. That's what he had been doing. And John and your aunt, my father and your aunt became very close.
Yes.
But the defender of the Menendez brothers, Leslie Abramson, who helped the boys with their tactic of the rape and all the motive. My father, I don't know who he hated more on earth than Leslie Abramson, and that John and Leslie were best friends, and that John dedicated his book, Red, White, and Blue, to Leslie, drove my father nuts. And I was in the middle. I loved them both. And John never badmouthed my father. My father always badmouthed John. and he would be so upset if he'd heard that I was at Elio's with John and John, which I was all the time. And then, and I'd always try to bring them together, and then they both end up turning on me. And then one day, a year before John died, my father goes to his cardiologist. He's had minor problems with his heart. And John had more extensive stuff and stents and different things. And he walks in to see for his cardiology appointment, and this animus had been going between them for going on almost 30 years. And he walks in, and there is John in the waiting room. And it's just the two of them. And they have the same cardiologist. And so Dad, finds a magazine, pretends to read it, total silence. And one of them looks up and says, "What the fuck are we doing?" And the two of them, realizing, they both got weak tickers and life is short, they just start to laugh. And they are crying with laughter. And then the nurse comes out and goes, "Mr. Dunne, the doctor is ready for you." And they both go, "Which one?" And they go, "I'm going to meet you for coffee afterwards. You go ahead and I'll do that." And they talked on the phone every day until he died. And I lost my place in the phone tree, but I gladly gave it up for him.
Wow.
And, Dad would just go, "Thank God. Thank God I walked into that office. Thank God." And they went right back to where they were. And it was such a joy. It was a wonderful thing to see.
That's one of my favorite scenes of your whole book. That's one of my favorite scenes of your whole book. It is very beautifully written. And I don't think we can end on anything better than that, actually.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much.